They thought he was a coward, a ghost pilot who flew easy patrols and came home clean. His Corsair had no kill tallies, no name, no story, and on a base full of bragging men, that silence stood out. But one morning, when the bombers flew without escort and didn't die, they saw something that changed everything. No orders, no glory, just a blue fighter, already in the fire before anyone else got there. And then everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The forward airfield shimmered with heat even in the morning hours, the Pacific sun already pressing down hard on the pierced steel planking that lined the runway. Tan sandbags ringed the revetments, their seams blackened from oil, smoke, and salt air. The air was thick with the smell of aviation fuel and the sharp bite of solvent. Men in stained flight suits moved between Corsairs and Wildcats, boots scuffing metal, sleeves rolled high, voices loud. It was the usual kind of noise, a mix of competition and relief. Each voice worked hard to be heard. Henry moved through it without sound. His steps were even, slow enough to be deliberate, but never uncertain. He carried his helmet under one arm, gloves tucked inside, the other hand trailing the edge of a clipboard that no longer held anything. His flight suit was the same shade as everyone else's, but lacked the darkened elbow patches and customized trim most had stitched over time. There were no squadron pins, no lucky scarf, no kill tags clipped to his collar. The only thing distinctive about him was how little he left behind when he passed. His Corsair waited near the edge of the lot, where the sun hit hardest and the fuel trucks didn't bother to park. The navy blue paint gleamed across the wings, but there were no markings, no names beneath the canopy, no stripes, no skulls, no kill tallies. The nose cone looked freshly polished, but the fuselage bore none of the theater art favored by most pilots. It looked untouched, like a museum piece someone had wheeled out by mistake. Someone snorted near the tent line. That blank slate again. Guy's allergic to paint, he said. Another pilot leaned back against a barrel, arms crossed, grin lazy. He's not flying. He's just guarding the thing. Laughter followed, low, but pointed. Henry didn't turn. He adjusted the gloves in his helmet and walked the line, scanning the prop, the flaps, the forward gear. One of the ground crew called something about his rudder being too clean to be real. Another joked that maybe his radio didn't work, so he never got the enemy coordinates. A mechanic by the tool trailer shook his head, wiping grease off his hands with a rag already black with use. Still hasn't painted a thing, he muttered. It's like the war missed him. That wasn't true. Not even close. But Henry didn't answer, and no one expected him to. At 1100 hours, the pilots were called to line up for a group photo near Revetment 3. Someone dragged the banner out, and the commander, short sleeves, square jaw, silver bar pinned dead center, stood in the middle like it was already history. The photographer motioned for the group to tighten up. People shoved, elbowed, smirked. One young lieutenant scanned the tarmac and spotted Henry, still walking his pre-flight. "You want in?" the lieutenant shouted. "Or are you just sticking with your shadow today?" A few snorted. The photographer didn't wait. The shutter snapped twice. Henry kept moving, his steps carrying him out of frame before anyone else said a word. Back at the tents, someone had tacked up the latest kill tally on the board. Thick chalk lines marked each confirmed downing, clustered around the same 5 names. Henry's line was blank. No one erased it. No one added to it. It had been blank for weeks. On his bunk, a folded scrap of paper waited. Someone had drawn a ribbon in ink, curled and ridiculous, with the words, "Best Scenic Patrol," written across the bottom. The sketch was pinned through with a bent safety wire. Henry looked at it once. Then he pulled it free, folded it again, and slid it into the pocket of his flight suit. Later, when no one was watching, he dropped it into the burn barrel behind the latrines. The paper caught quick. His face stayed the same. When the sun dipped low, painting the airfield gold, He returned to his Corsair. The air was quiet by then, only the hum of insects and the distant thump of boots on gravel. He laid his hand on the wing root for a second, fingers brushing the metal as if listening. Then he began his checks again. Not rushed, not lazy, exact. The propellers shifted faintly under his fingers. A rivet near the wing mount had been replaced with a newer cap, duller than the rest. He tapped it once with his knuckle, a familiar sound. His gloves were already back on. Farther down the lot, a pair of pilots joked about taking bets on who would add 2 more tally marks by week's end. One of them asked if ghosts counted. No one watched Henry. Not directly. But a mechanic glanced once from the far lot, and a sergeant near the tower muttered something under his breath. Neither said a word to him. He didn't need them to. He wasn't there to be seen. The hangar was always cooler before sunrise, the metal ribs of the roof still holding the night's breath. Condensation pooled in quiet patches near the walls. A few bulbs flickered overhead, barely holding their charge, casting a dim yellow light over the winged shadows of sleeping aircraft. Most men slept through this hour. Henry did not. His Corsair sat near the far wall, backed into its bay like a creature that didn't want to be noticed. The blue of its fuselage looked black in the half-light, the nose cone slightly dulled with residue from the previous day's run. Henry stood beside it, tightening a tool roll before sliding it under the storage flap in the wing root. His gloves creaked faintly with the motion. Every movement followed a rhythm. Left hand across the stabilizer, right thumb checking the trim tab. Step forward, inspect flaps, step back, repeat. He touched the aircraft not like a pilot prepping for combat, but like a craftsman revisiting his work. Nothing hurried, nothing skipped. He always launched early, never by more than 10 minutes, just enough for the tower to chalk it up to routine variants. The manifest never showed a destination, only a loose patrol marker and the usual timestamp. His Corsair always returned before the bomber groups left the ground. More than once. Someone had made a comment in passing. That Corsair's always back before we even launch. A young airman said over lunch, half laughing. No one answered, but a few had nodded, even if they didn't know why. Henry refueled his own aircraft. He rolled the hose off the cart, connected the line, ran pressure checks by hand. The refueling team had stopped bothering months ago. They joked that he liked it better that way. Maybe he did. The belly of his Corsair told a story that didn't match its log. The underside showed tight flak groupings. Scorch traces ran diagonal, not wide like you'd see in a turning dogfight, but sharp and clustered. Defensive fire. Someone once asked if he flew too close to enemy batteries. Henry had only said that altitude could be deceptive over water. He patched his own rivets, the visible ones, at least. Small sections near the left flap hinge were sealed with mismatched dull metal, circular and slightly uneven. They were quiet marks, not the kind that drew attention, but enough for a trained mechanic to notice. One had... He never brought it up again. Inside Henry's cot locker, beneath his flight vest and a folded towel, was a notebook the size of a mess pass. He never left it out. The pages were filled with clean rows of call signs and coded timestamps. Each one corresponded to a bomber squadron. The dates ran back months. Some were circled, some weren't. No comments, no tallies. He listened to the tapes. At night, while most of the tent played cards or drifted off to static-filled radio jazz, Henry sat with a battered headset cupped over one ear. He spliced mission chatter from old reels, clicking through fragments of transmission. Altitude calls, formation patterns, alert tone pings. You could almost rebuild the whole run from the pieces, if you knew what you were hearing. A scarf rested in the cockpit, folded flat over the radio panel. It wasn't regulation, just a pale, almost white length of cloth with the edge hemmed by hand. It didn't move when the canopy closed, and Henry never touched it mid-flight, but he smoothed it once, every morning, before stepping down. His boots never echoed, not in the hangar. He walked like someone used to being overlooked, and perhaps that was the point. The base moved around him like weather, loud, changing, and predictable. Henry didn't resist it. He simply kept to his course. The mission board never listed his assignments, but his Corsair burned fuel on every flying day, and its return times formed a pattern that mirrored every major outbound strike. His shadow traced the same route they would fly, just 30 minutes early and slightly off axis. Enough to matter. No one told him to do it. No one stopped him either. By the time the rest of the base stirred, Henry had already hung up his gloves and logged his fuel sheet. The morning radio played swing music through a haze of static. He sat by the open end of the tent, head down, pencil resting across a sheet of thin paper. The scarf from the cockpit now draped over his thigh. Outside, engines warmed. The air began to buzz again with talk and guesses and hands on shoulders. The killboard rattled faintly in the breeze. A tech called out a serial number. Someone else tossed a water canteen across a table. The day began. Henry watched none of it. He marked a small circle on his paper. Then he folded it shut and stood to leave. Smoke hung low near the mess tent, curling up from the oil drum stoves that stayed lit long after chow. Someone had rigged a deck of cards across a packing crate, and the laughter from the game rolled out toward the seawall in waves. The new bomber squad had arrived the day before, loud and full of tall tales. They called themselves Ridge Group, and no one had missed their entrance. One of them had painted a dragon's eye across the nose of his liberator and told anyone who listened that it could see through cloud. That morning, he had stood near the chalkboard and tapped his pen against the lowest tally row. He asked the group who the Phantom Line belonged to. He joked that the ghost Corsair was still haunting the strip. The others chuckled. A few glanced around. No one corrected him. Henry sat across the camp, away from the noise, near the edge of the barracks where the slope dropped toward the jungle. He was reading through folded flight charts by kerosene lamp, marking weather lines with faint pencil strokes. His boots were off. His socks were worn thin. The pages fluttered in the breeze, and he steadied them with one hand. Later that day, a senior officer stepped into the hangar during refuel and asked him, not unkindly, if he had considered a shift in role. He said a man with Henry's hours might be better off coordinating support runs. He added that morale might lift if more active pilots were in the lead seats. Henry had looked at the man, held the moment long enough to make it awkward, then nodded once. Not an agreement, just acknowledgement. The officer left without pressing. Someone chalked 2 new tallies beside Henry's name. They were crossed out before lunch. That evening, a fake medal appeared on his cot. It was made from thin cardboard and string, painted with green grease and a stripe of red from a can of flare marker. It said, "Most Scenic Patrol." Someone had taken time with the lettering. It was pinned to the side of his logbook. Henry studied it for a second. He didn't smile. He didn't sigh. He folded the string behind it, pulled it loose, and placed it inside the front cover of his log. Then he closed the book and went back to adjusting his scarf. The next morning, the medal was gone. No one saw him take it. But a cook at the latrine later said he noticed something catching fire in the barrel behind the tents just after sunrise. One of the base techs, young and talkative, leaned against the hangar door and watched Henry rinse the underside of the Corsair with a low-pressure line. The tech tilted his head and squinted. He said the wing root looked like it had fresh paint, kind of dull, almost like something had been covered. Henry didn't answer. He adjusted the hose, then shut off the line. The tech muttered to himself as he walked away. He's hiding something. Or he's hiding nothing at all. The scarf stayed in the cockpit. The charts stayed folded by his cot. The logbook filled slowly, one neat pencil line at a time. During briefing that afternoon, while Ridge Group compared maneuver claims and boasted about their fuel loads, Henry stood near the rear, unmoving. A sergeant asked if he was still flying blind, with no kills to show. A few snorted. One tried to hand him a stick of gum and said it was to keep his jaw from locking during those long, scenic loops. Henry took the gum. He didn't chew it. He just placed it in his chest pocket and left the tent when the meeting broke. That night, someone scratched a single line through the edge of his bunk rail. It looked like a flight vector. It had been sanded off by morning. At dusk, the sea wind shifted. A radio caught static and spit out half a weather update from a ship 20 miles out. Henry sat on an overturned crate by the fuel shack and cleaned the edge of his boot sole with the corner of a metal file. The jungle behind the camp creaked faintly, alive with crickets. Someone walked past him carrying a crate of supplies, paused, then looked at him sideways. The man asked if he was ever going to say what he did up there. He said Henry was always flying, but no one ever saw him fight. Henry looked up, not startled. He shook his head once, then returned to the boot. The man chuckled, not unkindly, and kept walking. The shadows grew long across the tarmac. Henry stood, brushed off his knees, and walked to the hangar. His Corsair caught the last of the sun along its spine. It looked like it had never flown. But it had, and would again. The Liberator came in low, one engine trailing smoke, the belly hatch rattling with loose gear. It skipped once on approach and slewed sideways across the sand before catching the matting. The landing gear groaned but held. By the time it stopped, the fire crew was already sprinting. 4 men clambered out. One was limping. Another held a strip of shirt against his head. The pilot dropped to the ground and stayed on his knees a long moment, catching his breath. When they made it to the debrief tent, no one spoke right away. Their flight suits were soaked through and their eyes didn't quite focus. The airman conducting the session offered them water. The pilot took it, nodded once, and said there had been a Corsair already in the air. The junior officer listening said he hadn't heard any escorts were scrambled ahead of them. The pilot insisted again. He said the Corsair was already on station when they reached the coast. It flew straight into the anti-aircraft curtain and stayed there. He said it didn't peel off, didn't climb. It just flew flat, right through it, like it wanted the gunners to see it. The navigator backed him up. He said the plane had no markings at all, no kill tallies, just blue. In the intelligence room behind the tent, an officer named Whitaker heard the story secondhand. He frowned and started pulling flight logs. He ran times against fuel orders. He pulled hangar sign-outs and matched each with the mission tapes. He drew lines on a clear sheet and overlaid it on the bomber route chart. The pattern was immediate. Every run from the past 2 weeks had a lone Corsair in the air 25 to 35 minutes before scheduled launch. Always eastbound. Always just off axis. The routes varied by mission, but the presence didn't. Whitaker called in 2 other officers. They reviewed the fuel records. One found a mechanic's note referencing a repetitive soot pattern on a Corsair's underbelly. Another found a requisition for low-altitude oxygen canisters, unusual for a fighter with no official deep-run profile. They traced the aircraft to the tail number. It belonged to Henry. Whitaker didn't speak for a long time. Then he pulled the chalk mission board off the wall and pinned Henry's launch times beside the outbound rosters. He didn't explain it. He just stepped back and let the room read it. The times lined up like stitches, each one tracking just ahead of a bomber formation. A decoy line, invisible until now. Someone whispered that he flew ahead. Another said it again, every time. The news traveled sideways at first. A few murmurs at the refuel station, a tech passing it to a mechanic. Then the name came up during a weather recon meeting, and someone laughed in disbelief. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like a release of pressure. It kept moving, voice to voice, until the whole tent knew. Then came the prisoner interview. A Japanese airman had been pulled from a raft after a destroyer went down 3 days earlier. He was young, barely 20. His shoulder was wrapped, and his knuckles were bandaged where salt water had gotten into torn skin. Through an interpreter, he answered questions slowly, mostly about call signs, unit placements, expected bombing patterns. When asked about fighter intercepts, he paused. There was one, he said, 1 plane. The interpreter leaned in. 1 plane. Yes. He nodded. A single plane with gull wings. Blue. No death stripe. No honor tally. The room went still. He said it came first. Always first. His words were halting but clear. The blue ghost. It made them fire too early. It drew their guns. Sometimes it disappeared. Sometimes it came back. They didn't know if it was real or if it was bait. In the next room, Whitaker stood at the glass panel and didn't move. The boards behind him glowed faintly with map pins and strike data. None of it had ever mentioned Henry. Until now. Outside, Henry sat near the corner of the hangar, his legs stretched out under a plank of shade. His logbook was balanced on his knee. He had a pencil in one hand and a folded flight chart beside him. He marked something in the corner, then underlined a number twice. Inside the command tent, they ran the records again. They checked tower tapes and sortie sheets. They scanned for duplicate entries, false entries, any possibility of error. None came. One lieutenant finally spoke. He volunteered for every one of those. Another said he never listed the missions, never logged them officially, never even told us. They summoned him to the command tent just before sundown. The air was golden, thick with light and engine grit. Henry walked across the runway with his helmet under one arm. His flight suit had a rip at the seam and a patch over the left shoulder from where exhaust had melted through the thread. Inside the tent, the group fell silent as he stepped in. Whitaker looked at him directly. "Your tail number matches a pattern we've been tracking." "Do you know what I'm talking about?" Henry said yes. "Were you ordered to fly those runs?" "No." "Why did you do it?" Henry looked past him, toward the tent flap that faced the sea. They were always flying into the worst of it. Seemed right. Someone went first. No one said anything for a long time. Whitaker asked if his aircraft was still airworthy. Henry nodded, said she could be refueled by 2100. He was dismissed. Outside the tent, the light had dimmed to that pale blue that only lasted a few minutes between sunset and dark. Henry stood for a moment, then walked back toward his bay. The Corsair sat beneath a lean-to of canvas, its nose catching the last of the light. No one had touched it. No one had ever needed to. Inside, on the chalkboard near the bunk rows, someone had written a single word under the blank line where his name had always been. It said forward. The alert came in just after dawn. A scout patrol had spotted the enemy fleet turning east, hugging the far side of the channel. There was no time for a full escort scramble. The forecast called for crosswinds and scattered cloud bands. Communications were patchy, but the strike had to go. 5 bombers were rolled from the hangar by 600 hours. Their crews moved fast. No banter, just hand signals and clipped checks. The assigned fighter cover was grounded at grid point 3 due to storms. Everyone knew it. The formation would be alone. The Liberators launched in pairs, engines low and heavy, radio traffic clipped and anxious. They climbed fast and banked south. By 6:20, they were gone from sight. The strip felt emptier than usual. At 6:42, the first scream came over the long-range radio. One of the bombers had spotted flak blooming early. They were still 10 miles from the target island. Then the shouting started. Enemy Zeros rose from the eastern ridge. They came low, masked by cloud, swinging wide in a hook pattern that caught the formation mid-turn. 2 Liberators peeled away, their gunners already firing. The sky lit with tracers. Anti-aircraft flashes snapped across the water. One tail gunner was heard yelling for more altitude, but they had no room. In the chaos, a new voice broke through. Something just dove in from above. "It's a Corsair." The formation tightened instinctively. The Zeros turned, following the new target. "That Corsair's bleeding fuel. Who the hell is that?" The blue fighter swept across the formation's nose down, diving straight into the heaviest fire. No markings, no stripes, no wingman, just blue. One of the bombers shifted formation behind it, then another. A third followed, trusting the path that had opened in the wall of fire. "He's flying cover for all of us." That came from one of the co-pilots, breathless. The Corsair flared upward, then rolled hard left, pulling the lead enemy fighter with it. A second passed beneath and vanished in cloud. The radio clipped again. "We've got smoke number 3's hit, but we're still flying." Below, the base went quiet. The tower played the broadcast across the main deck. Pilots froze in place. Ground crews stepped away from tools. Someone turned off the generator hum. It was just voices now. One mechanic leaned closer to the speaker and mouthed the words as they came. A cook in a grease-stained apron stood at the back of the group, still holding a ladle in one hand. The Corsair took another pass. A streak of flak tore open the left wingtip. The radio caught the sound but not the voice. "That's not an assigned bird. Who authorized this run?" Another voice answered, "Not official." "That's the Ghost. That's Henry." Two liberators broke contact and turned home, one trailing smoke. The others dropped payload across the enemy fleet's edge, catching the forward landing deck. The return trip was silent. Back at the airfield, men lined the runway without speaking. A tech held binoculars, tracking the smoke trail. The first bomber landed hard, brakes squealing. Its wing had a clean burn mark across the outer edge. The second bounced once and coasted in, one tire half inflated. The third came low but steady, crew intact. Then came the Corsair. The sound was wrong. Not like a fighter returning from patrol. The engine clattered on one side. A panel near the fuselage had peeled back. Smoke drifted from the exhaust in thin ribbons. The landing gear dropped late. It touched down and skipped again, then caught. The Corsair rolled nearly to the edge of the matting before it stopped. Henry climbed out. His left arm didn't move right. His flight suit was blackened down one sleeve. His boots were soaked to the cuff. He didn't wave. He didn't look at anyone. He walked. The crowd didn't move. They just watched. A few took off their caps. One man lowered a cigarette from his mouth and let it burn to the filter. The smoke mingled with the heat rising off the Corsair's skin. Henry crossed the strip and headed for the tent line. His steps were uneven but sure. The sun caught the back of his helmet and the patch over his shoulder. It flared for a moment, then dulled as he passed through the shadow of the radar shack. Behind him, the Corsair hissed quietly as the engine cooled. Someone jogged forward to check it. Another followed, but neither touched the airframe. They just looked. The outer panel was torn straight through, as if sliced by shrapnel. The wingtips smoked faintly. One tire was bare, down to the cord. Inside the command tent, the tower relayed the full strike report. Mission success confirmed. 2 enemy ships hit, all crews accounted for. 1 unlisted aircraft confirmed on intercept path. Whitaker stood near the radio with a clipboard he wasn't reading. He turned to the others. Everyone just saw it. Outside, a mechanic approached the Corsair. He didn't touch it. He just walked the length of the wing, looked at the scorch marks, the half-melted edge of the portside stabilizer. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a rag. Not to clean anything, just to hold in one hand. The third bomber crew came in last, slower than the rest. They had lost a comm line mid-flight. Their tail gunner stepped down first and pointed toward the Corsair without saying a word. "That was him," he said finally. The others didn't answer, they just nodded. Henry passed the fuel shack and turned toward the cots. His bunk had no nameplate. It didn't need one. He sat, pulled off his gloves, and laid them down flat. No one asked him anything. The silence around him said more than applause ever could. The command tent was quiet. The usual shuffle of paper and chatter of weather reports had stopped. Whitaker stood near the map table, staring at the strike chart with his arms crossed. A general from the visiting carrier group had just arrived and caught the tail end of the mission report. His uniform was crisp, his voice steady. He didn't raise it when he spoke. He asked who the hell had been in that Corsair. A younger officer, seated near the corner with his boots still laced for flight, answered without looking up. He said it was the one with no kill markings. No one laughed. No one corrected him. The general didn't ask again. Outside, the Corsair had been moved into full view of the main lot. The engine panels were still open. The nose cone was streaked with dust and oil, but no one cleaned it. A small ladder leaned beside the cockpit. At some point after mess call, a pilot from Ridge Group climbed up with a brush and a tin of paint. By sundown, the emblem was done. A single burning star, half veiled by a gray sweep of cloud, now rested just below the canopy glass. No initials, no name, just the symbol. The lines weren't perfectly straight, and the color bled slightly at the edges. But it caught the light when the wind moved through. Henry didn't see it right away. He ate late, as usual, alone near the end of the bench row, boots scuffed, tray balanced on one knee, the same section of bread, the same dented tin cup of water. No one sat beside him, but no one turned away either. Ridge Group walked past without comment. One of them nodded once, quiet and flat. That was all. The kill board had changed too. The joke tally that once sat beside Henry's name was gone. In its place was a chalk line drawn with care, a level horizon, a cloud shape above it, and just beneath that, a mark shaped like a flare with no trail. A second line had been added behind it, like a shadow. No one signed it. No one needed to. Henry passed it without slowing. His gloves were looped through his belt, his flight vest slung across one shoulder. He walked as he always had, with steady pace and no sound. Back at the tent line, someone had folded his blanket. His cot had been realigned to square with the post at the corner. His boots had been placed side by side. Small things, quiet things. He set down his gear, placed his gloves flat on the cot, then stepped outside again. The Corsair waited near the hangar edge, its nose pointed toward the wind. The emblem shone in the last of the day's light, glowing faintly in the reflection from the open bay. Henry approached slowly, but not with hesitation. He reached the wing and laid one hand flat on the surface, just ahead of the panel seam. He didn't move for a long while. The metal was still warm. The wind rolled in off the water. Somewhere behind him, a loose flag snapped once, then settled. The hangar doors stayed open, but no one walked through. The sound of boots on planking had stopped earlier, replaced by something quieter. Watching, not approaching. Henry's silhouette stayed still in the light, his head bowed slightly. His hand never left the wing. He didn't speak. He didn't turn. And this time, no one asked him to. He never asked to be known. Never raised his voice. Never stepped forward when the cameras rolled or the chalk tallies rose. While others measured worth in visible victories, he offered protection in silence, flying ahead, absorbing risk, and vanishing before credit could catch him. And yet, when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance and no one else was ready, it was his unmarked Corsair already cutting through the fire. This is not just a story about war. It is about the quiet strength of doing what is right when no one sees. About the kind of courage that never seeks attention. The kind of legacy that speaks only after the fact. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. And follow for more stories that honor those who serve without needing to be seen.